Today we're quickly going to look at inflation. This is aimed at grade 11 learners, but grade 12s can also benefit from this. Just note that grade 12s will need to know a little bit more than what's in this slideshow. So if we get started, what we need to know is we need to know the definition of inflation. Remember, they can ask us to define this in a test or in an exam. We need to know how inflation impacts on our purchasing power. We need to know the value of an item over time, so in other words, how to do those calculations. We need to understand how to calculate the inflation rate of an item. So if we look around in the world, we'll actually see inflation is something that we're very used to without realizing that we've come across it a lot of times. So if we look at the definition, inflation is a measure of the change in the purchasing power of money over time. So in other words, what would be important over here is the change in the purchasing power and then over time. If we look at an alternative definition, it could be the average increase in price for goods and services over time. Here you can see once again there's more than one definition, but it boils down to the same core concept. If we look at inflation, we need to remember that different items can have different inflation rates. So if we look at a picture like this, it gives us a whole bunch of things. If we look at cold drinks had an inflation rate of 7%, where meat had an inflation rate of 6.8%. So therefore, different products have different inflation rates. Now, if we look at how inflation will impact on your purchasing power, if we look at an example, Tembi earns a net income of 5,000 Rand monthly. She spends around 1,700 Rand on food monthly. Due to inflation, an average basket of goods will increase by 5% in price. So now we need to figure out how this is going to impact on her purchasing power. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at the basket of goods. So if the basket of goods was 1,700 Rand, which we find in the information above, and it increases by 5%, we have an increase of 85 Rands. So now we need to figure out that therefore the price of this basket of goods went from 1,700 up 85 Rands to 1,785 Rands. So her salary is going to remain the same. That was something very important that we read over here. So basically what's going to happen to the purchasing power is because she's paying more for this basket of goods, her purchasing power of her salary will decrease because she can basically buy less things with the same salary that she's getting. If we look at the value of an item over time, we need to remember that now we'll need to start doing some calculations. So we need to first distinguish between the terms inflation and then inflation rate. So inflation is the amount that the price changes. So this will normally be in cents or rands. And the inflation rate is going to be the percentage that we use to calculate the actual amount of inflation. If we look at the value of an item over time, this is where the calculation comes in. I'm going to show you a one-step method as well as a two-step method. So the inflation rate of milk was 4.4% in 2020. Now they're telling us milk costs 11 Rand 25 cents per litre in 2020. What will the cost of the milk be in 2021? So we basically now know that the price of this milk is going to increase by 4.4%. So if we do our calculation, the price this year times the 4.4% gives us 0.495 Rand increase, and therefore the price in 2021 is expected to be 11.75. Remember, we're working with money, so we can round off to 2 decimal places. If we do the same question in the one-step method, we still have all the same information that we had. So what we do now is we take 100 over 100, which is the original price. To that, we add the 4.4%, which is 4.4 over 100. So now we need to remember when we are adding with a fraction, the denominator stays the same and only the numerator changes. So 100 plus 4,4 is 104,4. So then if we take the price of the milk and we multiply that with this 104,4 over 100, we get the same answer that we did in the previous slide, 11 Rand and 75 cents. So this is the one-step method. We'll do another example and I'll show you. So if we look at this, the value of a house increases with an inflation rate of 7.5% per year, so annually. If the house is bought in 2018 for 825,000 Rand, calculate what the house will be worth in 2020. So what we'll need to remember here is we'll first have to go from 2018 to 2019. So for 2019, we will take the original price of the house, we multiply it with the 7.5%, and we get the amount of increase, and therefore we have the total worth in 2019 being 886,875 Rand. However, we've now also learned how to do it the one-step method. So if we have a look here, we did the same thing we did in the previous slide. We take the original amount, we add our percentage, we get our fraction, we multiply that in one step, and we still have the same amount. So now we must remember we're not done with our question, because this said the house is bought in 2018, but we need to work out the worth in 2020. So now we need to do the same calculations for the year 2020. So we'll take the amount that the house was worth in 2019. We multiply that with the same inflation rate that we've been using. And that now gives us an increase of this. We add them together and we get the total worth of this house in 2020. So what is important to note is that this is almost like compound interest. So we need to remember that you can't skip a year, that you'll have to do calculations for every year that they ask you. Now, once again, if we need to find the value of an item over time, but we need to work backwards. So all the examples we've done so far worked to the next financial year or the next financial term. Now we're going to need to work backwards. So if they tell you that the inflation rate, again, for cheese in this case, is 4.2%, and they tell us in 2020 the price is 95 Rand a kilo, now they want us to work out 2019. So now I definitely suggest that we use the one-step method. So we do the same thing we've been practicing, and that gives us 104.2 over 100. And now because we're working backwards, the only thing we do is we flip our fraction and we make sure that we now have 100 over 104.2. So the fraction is literally just flipped. And if we take the 95 Rands that we had for the price in 2020, multiplied with 100 over 104.2, it gives us a new price for 2019 of 91 Rands and 17 cents. You'll see now that this is cheaper than the price in 2020, and that is correct because remember the price increased from 2019 to 2020. If we now just quickly look back at our calculations, remember we can't skip a year. So if a question asks from 2015 to 17, you'll have to work out 2016 and 2017. Or if they say over the next 3 years, you'll have to do your calculations for 3 years. What we also need to remember is they can ask us to determine the inflation rate. So when we have to determine the inflation rate, they will need to provide us with 2 prices, and then we are working out the percentage. So if they tell us the price of oats went from 25 Rand to 29 Rand 50, what is the inflation rate? We're going to take the new price minus the old price over the old price times 100. So it's very easy. New price minus old price over old price times 100 gives me 18% increase, or 18% of the inflation rate. Now, what we also need to remember is we can do the same question, but use more than one value. So if they tell us that product A increased from 8 Rand to 9 Rand, and product B increased from 19 to 21 Rand. Which product had the biggest rate of inflation? So now we need to remember they're not asking us the biggest amount of inflation, they're asking us the biggest rate of inflation. And when we look at these two, it kind of seems in our minds that it should be product B because it went up with 2 Rand and it costs way more. But when we do the calculation, so if we now look at this, I've already done product A and B for you side by side using the same method we practiced in the previous slide. You'll see that product A ends up with an inflation rate of 12.5%, where product B ends with an inflation rate of 10.53%. So remember, product B had a higher amount for inflation, but in this case, product A has a higher rate of inflation. So therefore, the question asked which one has the higher rate of inflation, and our answer would be product A. I hope you found this helpful, and please make sure that you go over any other questions that are in your book.